Hello, and welcome to NAEA's 10th Town Hall of this school year, Art Educator as Artist. It's my great privilege and honor to welcome everyone to the conversation this evening. My name is Mario Rosero, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Art Education Association. And I'm a longtime both art teacher, arts administrator, and I'm thrilled to be in this role connecting arts educators across roles, especially over the past 15 months. So we are really in for a treat this evening. Before we jump into our content, I always like to take a moment to acknowledge the Native people and Native lands on which we all live in our own communities. I live in Washington, D.C., which is home of the Piscataway. And a great colleague of mine recently said, you know, when we do this, we should also talk about why we do it. So we do the Native acknowledgement for a number of reasons, but one is to acknowledge the history that there are many people across the world that have not had the opportunities, the privileges, things that have been afforded to many of us. And so we want to acknowledge and recognize that history and understand that these things are still continuing to this day. And we want to take that history and learn from it and move forward. But we really, I encourage everyone to, if you go to a website, nativelands.ca, and you can find the Native folks that are in your communities. We also like to take a minute to acknowledge everything that we have weathered as individuals in a community over the past 15 months as a result of COVID, and hopefully it has brought us closer together, but we do acknowledge that it has not been an easy time, and we send our good energy and good wishes to all of you and really appreciate you prioritizing this time together. So please know you can access closed captioning under live transcript at the bottom of your screen, and we suggest that speaker view, if you're in the audience, is the best view to choose for these conversations. A little bit more about the content for this evening. We know it's been a heavy year, so we wanted to really pivot a little bit, everyone's favorite word, to a conversation on paying attention to yourself as an artist. We know as arts educators, we can oftentimes pour our heart and soul into our classrooms, into our students, and aren't they worth it? But hey, we're worth it too. And so I know my own artistic practice always remains with me, but it gets a little pushed further to the side as things get busier and busier. And so we wanted to really underscore the value of dedicating that time, dedicating that practice to your own art making and creativity. So hopefully you'll find some inspiration from our conversation and our guests this evening. We live and breathe the idea of the town hall by honoring and utilizing the questions that were submitted by our audience in advance. So every question in our conversations today are based off of your questions. So don't be surprised if you hear your name and state, shout it out as we go through the conversation. The format is a long conversation, which essentially is a set of relays. So you see pairs of individuals in conversation. And so, for example, we'll have person A is the interviewer, person B is the interviewee. They have 6 minutes on the clock to have a conversation. At minute 5, a little bell will ring, letting them know they have 1 minute left. They wrap up the conversation. Person A exits. Person B becomes the interviewer. Person C comes in as the interviewee, and so on and so forth. If that makes sense, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it because you're going to see it happen in front of you and it works perfectly every time. I think we've gone over all of our logistics for the evening. Please keep the chat active. We love that our community is always very active in the chat, keeps the questions, the answers, the ideas going. If panelists are able to jump in, they will. My team, I want to thank Dennis and Krista behind the scenes. They're always ready to jump in and provide some direction as well. We will try to leave time at the end for additional Q&A, but we oftentimes use every second we have. So, keep that active in the chat and we'll get to as many of those questions as possible. Please also know we are streaming on Facebook Live, and this will be recorded and available on the NAEA website on the Town Hall page. And we are really thrilled that we had over 497 folks had registered for this evening. So I know we're nearing 200 right now, which I think for this time of year is a really good rate. So once again, speaker view and closed captioning under live transcript. And I think we are ready to get started with our first conversation. So it's my great privilege and honor to introduce and welcome my friend and colleague, Michelle Angela Ortiz, an artist hailing from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who I know as a Citizen Artist Fellow at the Kennedy Center. And I have to say, Michelle's work, if you've been to Philly, you've probably seen some of her murals, installations, and her work has a lot of passion and meaning behind it. So, Michelle, I'm really thrilled to welcome you to the conversation.
Thank you, Mario. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this amazing conversation with you. And just a shout out to all the educators that are listening to us today and joining us. Hi.
Absolutely. So I realize for our audience, they're gonna want many more minutes with each of you because you have such interesting artistic and programmatic work that everyone does. But I wonder, Michelle, if you might just give us like the 30-second, what's the summary of your work? I know it's not an easy ask, but how can we understand the work that you do in Philly? And I know it'll come out in the answers to your questions as well.
I think, well, if I were to choose one word, it would be a storyteller. And so what I do is I uh, say I like to transform spaces, public spaces, into visual representations through public art of stories and the change that communities want to see.
Excellent. And I've actually had the pleasure of seeing some of that firsthand, so I know that it's true. So we're going to jump right into members' questions. So Anne Renee from Washington wants to know, what is your strategy to continue to move forward as an artist in the midst of this extreme exhaustion of the past 15 months?
Yeah, I mean, this is an important question because I think as things are opening up right now, and as the idea of virtual or in-person classrooms are also kind of shifting and changing, that's very much in my mind right now, being a mother of a 6-year-old. Um, I think that it is about being really patient with ourselves. And in the beginning of before pre-pandemic, I had a lot of projects and traveling that I was doing, and I felt that it was really important to be patient with myself, take the time to kind of recalibrate and kind of digest all of these rapid changes that were happening due to the pandemic. And obviously, we have more information now than before, but really figuring out ways to be patient with myself, prioritizing not just what projects I decided to move forward with and can adjust, but also prioritizing time for myself to acknowledge any anxiety or fear or stress that I was feeling in my body. And being someone who is always working and always on the move, I wasn't really aware of that before the pandemic. So I think that's definitely been a learning lesson for me in just being present within my own mind and body, as I'm moving forward, and to prevent that exhaustion, having moments of rest, and that's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know we're very consciously aware of how busy we are and how much we fill our lives, and hopefully there's a little bit of a reset happening where we start to balance that out more. So Yesenia from California is curious, how do you find inspiration for your own art and what helps you to find ideas?
So as I mentioned earlier, like I define myself as a storyteller. I feel that there's so much power in stories, in how we tell them and how we listen to them and how we remember them, and so or how it also creates awareness, right? So for me, it's really been I've always been inspired by obviously my own family history as a child of immigrants, and being born and raised in Philadelphia and living in one of the oldest outdoor markets. I'm just surrounded by these amazing, beautiful stories, but that also reflect not just struggle, but triumph. And I feel that I see that a lot in many of the communities I connect with. I feel that when I engage with communities and individuals that are often not seen or heard, just opening the space for them to raise their own voice and energize their own power, existing power. I'm not giving anyone a voice; they have their own voice. um, I feel that that's me contributing to trying to lift these voices and communities up. So that is really what inspires me. Right now, I'm unveiling a number of public art installations through my Familias Separadas project, which is a national project that has been, many years in the making. We're now in phase 3. And I'm super excited to be sharing in these unveilings in North Carolina, in New Hampshire, and in Colorado, stories of undocumented immigrant communities and how they've been affected by detention and deportation. So, utilizing the power of storytelling to also create awareness and educate others in how to take action around unjust immigration policies. So, um, those are some really important things that I feel when I talk about power of telling our story. There's that individual power, and then there's that power that then kind of expands in terms of the change we want to see.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. And then Alana from Alabama asks, what resources are out there for teachers of visual arts who want to start developing their own artwork and outside career?
Yeah, so I prepared myself for this one because I wanted to make sure that I could share a lot of resources. So one thing is that I always go to is Creative Capital. They not only do they have grants, but they have these really great professional development workshops, as well as these webinars that I feel have been very helpful for me. Whether it was navigating through the gallery world to how to better promote yourself. So I feel that Creative Capital is a really great resource. There's also two other national organizations, the Southwest Folklore Alliance, which I'm now a part of this program called Participatory Action Research, which is
Mhm.
part of my project, our market project here in the market. But I think a ways to like think about how we're collecting stories and sharing stories is another resource that's available. The Alliance of Artists and Communities is also a place that I go to uh, pre COVID, and now that things are opening up, things might change. Of artist residencies, and I highly recommend that for folks that have a summer break and are able to take that time to really develop your work because during the year it might be too hectic. For the folks in Philly, or you can still kind of connect anyway, even if you're not in Philly, because everything's virtual right now. There's the Stockton Rush Bartow Foundation. There's a program called the Teaching Artist Program that I helped develop while I was there as a program manager, that also offers free professional development for artists working in communities, as well as the Leeway Foundation, which is a great resource, also offers workshops, talks, discussions, but also connecting to a larger network of artists that women artists in particular, or artists or individuals that identify as women that do art and social change work. So those are some of the examples that I can share out.
I know everyone appreciates your research, and I see that these are getting posted in the chat right now. And
Good.
I'll share some insight, for the audience. In our rehearsal last night, we had this great conversation around this, and one of the things that Michelle brought up that I thought would really stand out to our members is that when you are able to be part of an artist residency or work in collaboration with others or alongside others, there's something different that happens to your practice, right? Like you're responding to ideas, you're pushing each other, and this idea of creating a body of work might be something that we feel maybe it feels unattainable because I'm so busy and I've dedicated all my time to the school year. But it's really not just that individual piece, but creating a series of pieces that are interconnected and working alongside others. I think just starts to transform and remind us about this art making piece, and might even offer some new inspiration. So I appreciate all of these resources because they could be some good paths and opportunities for our colleagues. So Michelle, this time goes so fast. We're already at our closing question, which we ask all of our folks. Can you share what your tips for self-care are?
Yeah. So my self-care tip is really simple. And it being someone who was always kind of coming in and out of the house and moving around, like, and then during the pandemic being home 24/7, I think I relate to a lot of people where I started reorganizing and creating these like um clear energy spaces, I would say, in my home. But then, and then also just finding joy in the simple things. Like, I have a hammock. Why don't I have my hammock up and just chill in my hammock? So I make it a point that when I get really overwhelmed, I go to my little hammock in my backyard, and my little small South Philly backyard, and I make sure I just look up at the sky and see the clouds pass
I
by,
love
because
that.
it also makes me realize I'm just one little tiny speck in this massive universe. And so all these worries will hopefully like wash away. But that's my little self-care tip, is finding a little places of sanctuary in your home, in your workspace, wherever you can.
I love that. I feel like we just saw an uptick in hammock sales just now. I was like, I love that idea. I got to find a spot for one. Well, Michelle, really great connecting with you, and thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. So I'm super excited to be part of this conversation, not just because, Mario's awesome, but also just the other folks that are in this conversation as well. And I'm able to connect with Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. How are you?
Good, Michelle. How are you? Nice to connect with you.
So Cheryl Pope, so thank you for joining us, is an artist and adjunct full professor at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, sorry, in Chicago, Illinois. So hello from Philly to Chicago. So welcome to the conversation, Cheryl. We do have a couple of questions from folks here. So uh, Zan from California asks, what is arts-based research, and do you have any examples of arts-based research that can inform my graduate school thesis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like with the phrase arts-based research, I kind of took out the way that I interpreted that was just thinking about a research-based practice. And I think that can go a lot of different ways in terms of somebody could be, you could be researching something from your past that's more of a personal storytelling. You could be researching something in your community. You could be researching a type of mark making that's in the history of art. But I think within that, there's a lot of different methods of researching. And it's not like there's a clear scientific method that we have to follow to prove a point. But I think the most important thing is one, listening to people around you, listening to yourself, and listening and kind of creating a map of the questions that you're asking and where and how they're being understood or investigated within the world around you. I think about, I heard it on like a professor at Yale, you can sit in on those classes, and it was a philosophy class. And he said, the difference between a young philosopher and an old philosopher is that in a paper, a young philosopher spends the whole time trying to answer the question that they're asking, and an old philosopher tries to understand the question that they're asking. So when I'm teaching or thinking about research and the role of an artist, it's really trying to, not to answer something. It's not to point to say, here's how we solve this, or here's the solution, but to continue to keep asking it. So one artist, there's with Katerina Gross, who's a well-established artist. When I listen to her lectures, she can move so slowly with these tiny increments through her practice in a very formal way, shifting these kind of same questions that she's asking. So she would be an example, I would say, to start with, just on a very kind of narrow, within the arts, no big question, just kind of like within materials and formal elements.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot about how you're saying is like really about intention too, right? So understanding the question or exploring the question and thinking about the intention of that work as well, or how you're responding to it.
Totally. And I think that's where like the listening comes in, because if we're researching to only confirm what we know, we're not we're looking for evidence, but if we're actually researching, we're listening to hear what we didn't know, and that might inform the work.
So we have another question. This is from Karen from Connecticut. She wants to know, is there such a thing as creating only when you're inspired, or are there times when you have to create when you are not?
I think about this in post-pandemic and in spite, like, we can imagine the pandemic didn't happen. And I think about it, I love working out. I always think about the gym, and I relate how the body functions a lot. When I teach, like, if I have to do push-ups until my body hurts and go through these growing pains to get to where I'm growing my muscle. And a lot of times the days I absolutely don't want to go to the gym, I end up having the best workout, and I know I needed it the most. So I think about that. I'm not inspired to be making something right now, but sometimes going there and doing that is exactly when something could happen. And I think the second thing, I imagine, if I was teaching, not in higher ed, but in high school or elementary school, this past year was incredibly difficult. So I think going light for the summer in terms of, if not being inspired, that it's okay. And I think one way to help kind of maybe relieve it is helping ease the idea, like you're mentioning the word with intention, that the intention is just to make. It's like the next 3 hours, I'm just going to cover these 10 pages in graphite. Mm-hmm. That's it. And not knowing that what it's going to say or what it's going to mean, or, not getting hijacked by this, the intention, the purpose, the storytelling, the message. I really think that's suffocating a lot of our motivation. I really value play and exploring. And I think, there's something greater in this than us, and we have to give that space for it to tell us.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm definitely taking that in as well as you're sharing that. Jamia from California asked, how do you deal with pretentious people in the art world who might believe that art teachers are not serious artists?
I know, I feel bad for them, because in a lot of different ways, because it's to me, with teaching and in my own making, it's all about finding freedom. And with teaching in the classroom, and we're giving freedom. So with all of this, our fight for justice, our fight for, and all these specific issues, or, shows us that there's nothing more empowering in life than setting up experience where people find freedom. And that exchange of breath, of that give and take, that we are engaged in regularly as artists and teaching artists. And that stigma is always there, because it's an ego-based elite industry, and there's going to be rooms that are cloudy and rooms of people that are clear. And hopefully, the less attention we give with that person or that era of pretentious, the more we're able to find where this becomes relevant to us and people that are connecting in those ways with us.
Absolutely. I think about that question, and I think about my art teacher, Teresa Kramer, who thank God for her that I was able to understand what was accessible to me, because no one else in my family was an artist. The first time I went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art was at 15 because of a contest she told me to apply to, and now I'm exhibiting there, with a body of work that represents not just my story but other Philadelphian stories, right? And I think educators are so important, and specifically in my own experience, just being a child that didn't have access to these arts or cultural spaces, or at times didn't even feel welcomed, and to have someone that would basically say, no, you should try this, and open the door, like, it's so important and essential. So last question.
Yeah.
What are your tips for self-care?
Yeah, My first one is fresh flowers. I've really fallen in love with roses during the pandemic. I feel like they're this slow motion theater, and just really being able to observe the way even just their colors shift, and that things come and go, that there is time moving, that things are passing, and just as they let go, I can let go. The second one is a glass of wine. I'm not mad about a glass of wine at all. And the third one is that I did bring in during the pandemic that I'm going to keep, I call it Silent Sunday. And it's really just bringing back that day of rest. But I commit 3 hours to the couch, no phone, no book, no nothing. And I just try to imagine like a receipt coming out of my mind of all of the noise and chatter, and that just to really clear everything. And that's really been transformative, and just staying committed to that. Thanks, Michelle. My turn to ask the questions. I'm really excited to invite Marissa Rios to the conversation. Marissa Rios is Chief Learning and Engagement Officer at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. We had the wonderful opportunity to work together in Chicago at the Museum of Contemporary Art. So we are old friends combining in this conversation again, which we love to visit. And we have some great questions for you, Marissa. The first one is from Bernadette in Massachusetts, who asks, what are your thoughts on sharing your own work with students?
Well, hi, Cheryl. It's been so long, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And I know we only have just a few minutes, so I'll get into the answers, but just to say thank you, Mario, for putting us together and this whole group. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience so far. So, I was thinking about this question all day yesterday as I was meeting with my staff planning our teacher professional development work this summer at Crystal Bridges. And I really think about the educators that we meet at the museum. And I think about how they truly, truly want to bring their full selves to their work. And I think that's the key to this. That's the key answer to this question. It's like we owe it to our students to bring our full selves to our work. Your teaching hat, your teaching self, and your artistry. To me, teaching and creativity are so intimately linked. And I even think about the programs, Cheryl, that you and I planned at the MCA, where those lines are deliberately blurred. Mm-hmm. And I remember one professional development workshop we created. You led it with Amanda Lichtenstein. It was all around like your alter ego, right? And so tapping into teachers and their sort of like alternate life, their alternate side, and that kind of creativity that came out during those 3 days, and the kind of contemporary art practices that teachers really engaged with to dig into those 3 days. I think about that as a really great example in which teachers brought both their pedagogy and their studio practice into the making of those 3 days. I don't know if you have memories of that workshop.
Oh yeah, Amanda and I talk about it all the time. We're like, why didn't we make that our career, just running that workshop everywhere? But it's so true, because that it really lets a passion come into the classroom. But there's like an immediate, in the students feel that when when something lights you up, you bring that light into the space, into the room with them, and they feel it.
For sure.
Judy from Tennessee is interested in knowing, how do I develop how do I develop the discipline of time in my studio? So maybe some advice on that.
Yeah, well, I think about developing a system of accountability for yourself, not for the pure reason and purpose of that you need artist educators in your community, in your sphere, to uplift each other and to hold each other accountable to keep creativity and artistry alive. I mean, I've been reading actually comments in the chat section since the beginning of this program, and I think I'm going to call out Julie Zemmel and Kristen Holmes Linder, and they talked about, you know, the struggle of finding energy and momentum in their creative practice. And I think, man, we are with 500 people today who are part of our community, who will help us keep that accountability to creativity and to artistic practice alive. So I say, let's build community. If you don't have one in your school, if you don't have one in your immediate sphere, there's 500 people on this call who can help you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's so supportive. And even just how I heard this line the other day where it's the body remembers, and I write my prayers every morning, and it's like my body just knows that's going to happen. It feels out of sync if it doesn't happen. So I think even just building in that rhythm, the body wants to just keep coming back to it. So I think both of those in combination. We're back in Massachusetts with Karen. How do we get our schools to support our art making? What colleges expect when colleges expect art from artists / professors, but not high school?
Well, I struggle with this question. I think in this continued climate of testing and school accountability, how do we continue to shine a light on this question? And for me, I think it goes back to the first question you asked me, Cheryl, which is, and my answer, which is how, bringing your full self to your job, because, if like you have to advocate for art making in your school because you're going to be the biggest advocate and fan of, and I think that sort of that energy and positivity, I know this may be a little too overly optimistic in our climate, but that I think it starts with that energy and positivity, and that kind of modeling for that advocacy for art making starts with the teachers. And I hope that it extends and, it will eventually influence the other stakeholders and your administrators in your school.
Yeah, and I wonder, I know instead of even from the top down, where we know there's so much empowering in the voices of young people and their connections through social media and that. And I mean, we hear Carrie James Marshall in rap songs now, like Jay-Z's, like I got KJM all lined up on the wall, where these young people would want to come in and be asking, how do we know about these people? Where are these designers? Oh, Virgil's designing for Louis Vuitton. How did he get that? What does that look like? And having that voice rise up, I think also can help them, the two together.
You're absolutely right. I think, students have a great awareness of art making and contemporary artists. And so if that's their frame of reference, how could you, I can only imagine bringing those frames of reference to your teaching in school, really, hopefully expand that support for art making in your district and school and classroom. Yeah.
Agree. And of course, we're going to conclude with your tips and tricks that you've been using.
Well, I think a little bit of what Michelle had mentioned, totally picturing you sitting in your hammock in your backyard. For me, that nature, really that experience with nature sustains me. Breathing sustains me. This morning, I woke up scrolling through my feed, and BBC released the 90 seconds of whales breathing. And no narration, but just like footage of whales breaching, kind of breaking the surface of the water and releasing spouts of water through their blowholes. And I thought about how majestic, how deliberate and intentional that act of breathing was for these whales. And I think about how I so don't do that. I go about my day to day, I get up, I, drink my coffee, go to work, and I have, and I rarely take the time to just even pause and notice my own breathing. And I think, if anything, the sort of COVID moment has taught us, is how important breath is and how life-sustaining it is. And so I really been thinking about that. And I think to me, if one thing I'm going to take away from this week and from this conversation is that, breathing and paying attention to that in my own body.
I love that. That's my prayers are my gratitude. And it's the breath is that's my first line of gratitude. Marissa, this has been so lovely. I am going to let you be the interviewer. Thank you so much for all that you shared.
Thanks, Cheryl. Well, it's my pleasure to segue to our next speaker and guest. James Reese is an artist, researcher, and teacher, and he comes to us from Provo High School in Utah. Welcome, James.
Hi, Marissa. It's great to see you.
How has your school year been? How did it end?
It ended much better than it began. Let's just say that. I think that hopefully that's been true for most of us.
That's great. That's great. Well, I have some great questions from teachers here. I'll start off with Catherine from Vermont and also from Kristen. And they want to know, how do you balance being an artist and teacher during the school year?
It just takes a degree of organization and being mindful and intentional. I set deadlines for myself. For example, today when I got up, I had a list of things that I needed to do. That's true with teaching. I have a show coming up I'm part of a show in July. So that meant I had to prep some canvases today and get that ready. So it was just really setting some goals, gallery shows, and different places to show the work. It pushes me to create if there's somewhere it's going. And then the second thing that's been very helpful is to, what I would say, find your tribe, a support group that will help reinforce you in doing your artwork, holding you accountable. I think Michelle says something to that degree. And that peer dialogue is crucial to maintain the momentum you need, because we all know that teaching is emotionally, physically draining. So you need some extra boost from people around you that will cheer you on in your own creative endeavors.
Find your tribe. That seems to be one of the themes today, is that collaboration and community. Do you have any anecdotes about creating a rhythm of making and showing work while you're also teaching full time?
Yeah, ideally we'd like to curate this so it seems like I do this perfectly, but the reality is it's kind of like I'm playing time Tetris and trying to fill tasks within my limited schedule, and it doesn't always work. As my wife Maribel sat down with me just yesterday and said, you're overcommitted right now. And when I can't talk to you in a day because you're too busy, that's not okay. Because, that's another hat I didn't say, that my partner, my spouse needs time too, right? And family, those are another element. So it's kind of like playing time Tetris, and sometimes things don't work out. Just to give you an example, an anecdote. So today last night I was called by a gallery that I had an opening with a friend. We did a collaborative show that had a group. It's also a music venue. I guess the death metal rattled some of the works off the wall and they were heavy works. So I was a little surprised. So I went and had to do that. And then this morning I got up and I had to review edits for an article, so an educational component. And then I met with my colleagues that were going to present. And then I had to prepare the 10 works for a show, because I'm going out of town, which I'm preparing presentations for a workshop I'm doing at the University of Cincinnati. And that's kind of what the day is like, that time Tetris. You can see that sometimes there's snafus and things don't line up perfectly like the game of Tetris. So I do the best I can. And sometimes it's just maybe not taking on too much. At the same time, setting goals that you're pushing yourself to produce.
Great. Well, another question comes to us from John in California, and he wants to know, how does being an art educator inform your artistic practice, and vice versa?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think initially we talked a little bit about that arrogancy in the art world, and that I honestly shared that sometimes I was a little uncomfortable about the two worlds blending. But one of the things I've learned with my students that I try to incorporate in my own artistic life is embracing failure and trying to be vulnerable. Encourage myself to reacquaint myself all the time with processes connected with failure, because those mishaps are where we grow, right? Some people have been writing in the chat about uncomfortable about finding a venue to show your work, or it does take a degree of vulnerability to approach a gallery or some venue. Do it. We ask our students to do that all the time, right? to step outside their comfort zone, to do things they're not acquainted with. We need to be okay with not doing things well. And that's one of the things I've learned. The other thing is there's some overlapping practices. Just one I could think about immediately is what I require my students is to have a visual journal with them all the time. I do that same thing. So I try to mirror that in my own practice, and my students see that. So hopefully I'm a good example of what I ask them to do. I'm not hypocritical.
Practice what you preach, right?
Exactly.
A question from Tara in Nevada. James, how do you juggle the two very different brain sets in order to be successful in both?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that I do is I actually, between coming home from work, a typical schedule, I get home around 3 and I jump on my bike for an hour and a half. That kind of buffers my mind and allows it to kind of slow down as I exit the classroom, and I can shift my mindset and my emotions, and physically it helps me kind of recalibrate. So when I go into the studio, I'm kind of, I'm able to deal with all the emotions that may have built up and be able to shift. And it gives me ironically, through cranking through the mountains, I get a sense of mindfulness that prepares me for studio practice. But honestly, I think more and more, I think of art as art, whether I'm doing it, teaching it, or talking about it. I see that they're really merged and meshed together. It really is kind of the way that I see my life as a creative process, and that I'm always improvising and it's emerging as a new practice. And that's come with time, right? To really try to get the two to work harmoniously. They don't always do that, but I try to.
Right. Well, we just have one last question for you, James, and something that we've been asking all of the panelists. What are your tips for self-care?
Oh, that is a great question. Here, one thing is to be more charitable to yourself and others. And here's a quote by Parker Palmer: "When the going gets tough," and obviously this year this pertains, "turn to wonder. Turn from reaction and judgment to wonder and compassionate inquiry." So I really think that helps me to ask what's going on in my interactions with others and be much more genuinely sensitive to others' needs and to myself. And then the second thing I do, and I've already alluded to, is I really embrace the release of endorphins that come through exercise on a regular basis, and the opiate receptors in our brain that really react to that. But I also go and get a massage weekly, which may seem really indulgent, but it makes me feel so much better. It's one of those things. It's my hammock, Michelle, is the massage. It just feels so much better after a massage than before it.
Well, thank you, James.
Thank you, Marissa.
Inspirations and practical tips from you. Thank you so much.
You bet. It's good to see you. Okay, Mario, you're joining us back, and I have a few questions for you. It's been a great conversation, very relevant, and obviously we have a lot of questions that we still may have that conversation going on. I hope people know they can contact me, and I'm sure the other panelists would be open for direction and guidance from people that have questions that we didn't address. One question from our audience members, Eliza from Vermont: "How can I collaborate artistically with my students, encourage my students to artistically problem solve and work together?"
I've been thinking a lot about this question, and I love it because it makes me think back to my classroom days. And the thing that was resonating with me is, helping students to learn how to negotiate, right? Like, I think that we forget that so much of art making is negotiating, whether it's a solo practice or a group practice, right? Like, I'm negotiating between materials, between mark making, between, like where is an image going to get placed on that piece of paper, right? Am I going to layer it? Am I going to add? Am I going to take away? But when I was in the classroom, I would oftentimes do these sort of design challenges, especially with my 4th and 5th graders, where there was a task ahead of them and they had to work in small groups to sort of come up with different solutions to a space or to an area of the school that they were going to transform. And we spent a lot of time in those groups talking about how it wasn't necessarily that they were fighting or disagreeing, but that this was part of their art making practice, was to make their case and then negotiate as a group and then make that case as a united front to the rest of the class. It was just a very fascinating process. But what I found is that then they were more likely to take risks because they felt like they had created a safe space within their groups. So I think negotiating great. is a great inroad. If you can build that muscle within your students, I think that's a great way to build those collaborative muscles.
Boy, and what a great skill for anyone, right? Not just within the creative industries. What are you hearing the trends and takeaways from the conversations we've been having?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took lots of notes. Put up a whole page here. So this is really coming from the 4 of you. So the power of storytelling, patience and prioritizing. I love this, the balance between struggle and triumph, right? I just love those two paired together. Thinking about a body of work, having a network of artists, chilling in the hammock, finding a sanctuary. I think that connects to the massage piece too. Understand the question, really understanding the question, listening, growing our arts muscles. Cheryl, I got that from you. I love your silent Sundays, bringing our full selves to the work, tapping into alter egos. For some of us, that ourselves as practicing artists might be our alter ego, but maybe those also get to be integrated. Accountability, time to breathe, being intentional, finding your community, and then this embracing failure and being vulnerable. And isn't it funny? It's like the arts are such a great space for failure. Mm-hmm. And I only wish that we could all embrace it more, right? It's like, especially in a school hierarchy, you have a space where failure is okay, and then tremendous growth happens out of it, right? Because it's like it's a continual cycle of growth and improvement. And so anyways, these are great takeaway ideas from the 4 of you. So I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Mario. What advice would you give art educators right now?
If folks have attended town halls before, I apologize. I give the same answer to this every time because I firmly believe in it, which is don't put yourself last, right? As an educator, we are so trained to put everyone else, put our entire school community, put our students before us. And I'm not saying they're not a priority. I'm just saying we cannot be so depleted or give so much of ourselves that there's nothing left. So really make sure that you are reinvesting in yourself, especially for those that get, whether it's a break or even just a transition moment as the school year closes, to pause, to breathe, to step away, to start to recharge.
Great, great. And what are your tips for self-care?
And so then this is the other thing I do in every town hall is I change my answer every time.
Good.
I'm about to do that. But my new thing for recharging, I love to sew, and my grandmother taught me how to sew. So she taught me how to hand sew, and then I moved to machine, and now I'm back to hand stitching. But I learned this sashiko is a Japanese mending approach that has these beautiful stitches.
Oh yeah.
They're very like organized and linear, and I have just started to like mend clothes that need a little attention, elbows on jackets, jean pockets and jean knees, and really doing this mending technique. It is so it's my version of breathing, Marissa. It's a good way for me to slow down and just take time. I mean, like each stitch is the most peaceful thing I could imagine doing. So that's my tip right now.
Great. Hey, thanks, Mario.
James, thank you so much. So audience, if you would please join me in a thunderous round of applause for Michelle, for Cheryl, for Marissa, for James, for not just sharing their time, but sharing their great ideas and their wisdom and expertise with us. I know how many ideas and how much of a recharge that everyone just got from this evening. I also want to just take a minute and acknowledge any of our NAEA board members that made time to join us tonight. We appreciate all of your support. If I can do one quick question for everybody, I'm going to frame it because this is going to literally be like 30 seconds a piece. And then I'm going to close us out. But listening to everyone, I just wonder if there's one thing that you're personally inspired by right now, whether it's an idea or another artist or something that you're really interested in tackling. Is there like one thing that you're really inspired by right now? James, it looked like you might have had something to start with.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the idea generally about creative constraints and how it forces us to think differently. COVID has certainly done this, right? Within these limitations, I think I've been able to form new relationships with art educators and artists, and that we've created the show I was referring to that got rattled off the wall was a collaborative project from an artist I met through a Zoom who lives in Boston. And so it does force us to think of new ways to connect. And so that creative constraints, I think, is something that we can look at this opportunity or this year as an opportunity.
Thank you. Creative constraints. Michelle, what do you think? I'll pick on each of you, so just might as well get ready.
Can you say the question again? Because I want to make sure I'm answering.
Source of inspiration right now. Is there one thing that's like really got you excited or inspired right now?
I mean, I think which has been extremely difficult during the pandemic, but the beautiful, the beautifulness, I would say, of gathering, right? Like just being in the presence of others, right? I think that took it for granted. Some people take it for granted, but just with some of these unveilings and with the local artists that have been part of the Familias Separadas project and seeing some of our events that are happening, we're still social distancing, but how important it is to gather. And I feel that it's not just about being in the presence of one another, but just the spirit of gathering. And so I really miss that, but I also am like slowly being a witness to that and figuring out the best way to do that where I am as well. So
lovely. Thank you, Michelle. Cheryl?
Pattern, lights. I know it sounds like but I love watching lights, and then the third one is looking at domestic spaces as subject matter.
Oh yeah, I love that.
Thanks.
Pattern, lights, domestic spaces as subject matter. Thank you for that. And Marissa, close us out.
Today I'm inspired by the idea of expanding my notion of what artistic practice could look like and should look like. And I'm taking away from this conversation, play, research, and failure and community building are, great ways to articulate one's artistic practice. And I'm taking that away from today.
I love that. I feel like you just came up with the title of our next workshop. Play, failure, and community building. You heard it here first, folks. Get right on that, team. Thank you again to the four of you. You have my great gratitude, and thanks for being part of this lovely conversation. And we're gonna just switch over before we close out. We have about 2 minutes of slides just to let you know about some important things coming up. So first off, our conversation, all of our guests contributed to this handy dandy handout that is immediately ready for download. You can find it on the Town Hall website, but you can also scan the QR code here with the camera on your phone for immediate download. It has great tips, some resources, and also focuses on self-care. So please access this. There's a whole library of them now on the Town Hall website for each of our topics, all 10 of them. And if you enjoyed connecting with your community this evening and across many of our town halls and programs, please consider becoming a member of NAEA or rejoining or promoting this to your friends and colleagues, because this is really, I've been that lone art teacher in the basement art room. And even though I love that, I certainly didn't have the colleagues that I wanted until, someone found me and reached out and invited me in, and I was like, oh my gosh, here's a space where I can brainstorm, I can share ideas, I can connect, and folks understand what my day-to-day is. And so this is a special place. So please consider becoming a part of NAEA. Not just looking forward to our New York Return to Live convention in 22, but we have a series of webinars, webcasts, there's leadership opportunities, there's the online forum, our honor society, subscriptions to our NAEA news and our publications. Anyways, a wealth of resources. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And Upcoming webinar is the visual note taking. We're really excited about this on Wednesday, June 23rd, using words and pictures in art education classroom and beyond. I know this is a really popular one. And another webinar, so changing the arts education landscape, think about what's next. That's on Wednesday, July 27th. And our virtual national convention, as you know, was a huge success with over 4,500 attendees, but all of the sessions that were recorded are still available online. We extended the registration deadline, if you haven't accessed that yet, to July 1. So that's still available for purchase, and that will give you purchase all the way through, or access all the way through August 31. So it's more professional development in the arts than you could use in an entire lifetime. So please take this opportunity. And I wanted to remind everyone that there is this great Arts Are education campaign across all art forms. This is a national movement that really gives you a platform to make a pledge, for your district to pass a board resolution, for you to contact your elected officials in your community to make your case for arts education. So please, if you haven't joined this, please do. All the art form associations are really behind this. The website is right there at the bottom. And then just a reminder that last week we did a very special town hall focused on the ESSER funds. So through all the CARES Act opportunities, there's a huge multi-billion-dollar investment in education right now, and the arts have a really elegant fit into that. So please download that resource or watch that webinar. It's going to be really helpful to make sure that the arts are in that conversation. And my friends, I thank you so much for joining this year's series of town halls, and we plan to offer this again. We're taking July off, and then we'll start again at the end of summer for the beginning of the school year. So thank you so much, and stay well.